"Wheelchairs should stay at home. Don't bother other people." The words sliced through the diner like a blade. In the corner, the old Navy veteran in a wheelchair only gripped tighter onto the chipped blue ceramic mug. A young man in a red hoodie walked past, shoving hard against the armrest. He toppled to the floor, coffee splattering across the tiles. From his canvas bag, a pair of dog tags and a U.S. Navy baseball cap tumbled out. The diner went dead, silent. No one bent down. 30 minutes later, the deep rumble of a diesel engine rolled in from the pier. A gray military SUV stopped at the door. The latch clicked, the door swung open, and 4 Navy SEALs strode in, steps firm, eyes cold as steel. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Have you ever seen humiliation turn into honor in the blink of an eye? Samuel "Sam" Harlan, 72, was a former Master Chief Petty Officer in the United States Navy, having served for nearly 2 decades, including 2 deployments with the SEALs in Vietnam and the Gulf. An accident during a hostage rescue mission in Somalia had taken his right leg. Since leaving the service, Sam had lived alone in a small house near the San Diego shoreline, just a few minutes' roll from the pier. Every morning, while the air still carried a trace of mist, he appeared at the Harbor Lights Diner, his worn-out wheelchair rolling steadily across the tiled floor, slow and measured like the rhythm of his life. He always chose the same table by the window, where he could look straight out at the dock and the moored ships. On the table, he would place a chipped blue ceramic mug brought from home, the only thing that remained from his years stationed at the naval base in Virginia. He spoke little. In fact, many of the newer staff only knew him as the limping old man who drank coffee alone. Sometimes, a few younger customers would glance over at him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Sam never responded. He would simply tighten his grip on the armrest of his wheelchair and gaze out the window. Those with a keen eye might notice the faded trident tattoo on his left forearm, the emblem of those who had endured the Navy's most grueling training. But Sam never spoke of it, never boasted. He kept his past to himself, as one would guard a treasured possession too precious to risk dropping. Living in Coronado, a town steeped in naval tradition, meant seeing uniforms every day. Occasionally, a young sailor would pass by and pause for half a second, noticing the frayed edges of Sam's U.S. Navy cap. They would give a small nod. He would nod back. No words were needed. His house was modest, a world map hanging on the wall, a few photos of shipmates taken on the bow, and a yellowed family portrait. His wife had been gone for many years. His only son lived in another state. Sam kept his routine up before dawn, coffee in hand, eyes on the ocean, always returning home before the diner filled up. But beneath that quiet exterior was the life of a sailor who had known storms. Sam had dived into pitch-black waters to cut explosive lines, climbed onto a ship's deck in the middle of a driving storm to haul a wounded comrade to safety, and heard his own breath echo inside a dive mask when he was only seconds from death. The accident in Somalia, a dry, concussive blast underwater, had ended his career and taken his right leg, but it had not taken the sharpness of his watchful eyes or the discipline etched into his blood. At the diner, he was just another regular most people passed by. Only Melissa, the young waitress, noticed how he always placed his tip neatly beneath his mug before leaving. Once, she had asked softly, "Were you in the military, sir?" His reply was simply, "Just worked more under the water than on land." The answer was both true and tinged with humor, making her laugh, though she knew not to press further. Today, the sky was clear and the breeze gentle. Sam rolled into the diner as always. The mug was set on the table. Fresh coffee filled it to the brim. He looked out toward the pier, where a few sailors were tying down their lines. No one knew that in just a few minutes, this calm would be shattered and the man many saw only as the limping old man would become the center of a story the entire diner would never forget. What do you think could make a quiet diner in Coronado fall silent in a matter of seconds?
Welcome to Veteran Life Stories, where real sacrifice meets unforgettable storytelling. Subscribe and keep their courage alive.
Melissa, just in her early 20s, poured coffee for Sam while noticing small details that others rarely saw. He never sat fully upright, as if leaving an invisible space behind him for a backpack or a comrade. When folding napkins, he did so with precise, even creases, as if preparing an important map rather than a disposable piece of paper. Sam never spoke of where he had been or what he had done, but the signs were there for those who cared to look. The faded trident tattoo on his left forearm, no cheap ink could survive decades of sun, wind, and salt water like that. The SEAL Team 4 baseball cap, frayed at the edges, its silver logo worn down where he often held it when setting the cap on the table. On cold days, he wore a dark blue windbreaker, its collar worn but still stiffly folded as if fresh from a military parade. To the unknowing, these were just old things. To those who had worn the uniform, they recognized these were not trophies, but reminders. Sometimes, Melissa caught the corner of his mouth twitching into a faint smile when a training ship passed offshore. That smile wasn't aimed at anyone and never received a reply. But when the ship faded from view, his eyes grew distant, as if following another vessel at some harbor decades ago, where the smell of engine oil, the clatter of metal, and the rhythm of crashing waves blended into the unique soundtrack of a sailor's life. To many regulars, Sam was oddly polite. If a napkin fell on the floor, he would pick it up and fold it neatly before tossing it into the trash. When Melissa was busy, he would wheel over to collect empty coffee cups left on tables, stacking them tidily at the counter as if it were an assigned task. No one asked him to, no one paid him, but he did it regularly, like an old habit he couldn't break. His subtlety sometimes carried a hint of humor. Once, when Melissa accidentally spilled coffee onto a saucer, Sam just looked at her and said softly, "The sea always finds a way into the ship. Coffee's no different." She laughed, unsure whether he was joking or recounting a true story. Men like Sam often have their own ways of keeping themselves separate from the world. He wasn't lost in the past, but neither was he fully detached from it. His silence wasn't cold, it was more like guarding something. Perhaps memories, perhaps an old, unspoken promise. In Coronado, people were used to seeing sailors in uniform pass by, but Sam was different. He was no longer part of the formation, no longer marching to a steady cadence, but every motion from how he placed his cup on the table to how he surveyed the room still radiated enduring discipline. Even his wheelchair, from rims to screws, gleamed as if freshly inspected. Sometimes, older patrons who had served in other units would pause and exchange a look with him. No greeting, just a nod that sailors give one another when recognizing the face of someone who survived where not everyone returned. To the rest of the world, Sam was just an old man drinking coffee every morning. But after months of watching, Melissa began to understand that he brought more into the diner than just a chipped blue mug. And this morning, as sunlight slanted through the window, she saw him lower his eyes from the bay and look down at his hand. His thumb unconsciously brushed the edge of the trident tattoo beneath wrinkled skin, like a man checking his weapon before a mission. Melissa didn't know that in a few minutes, that silence would be broken, and everyone in the diner, including her, would come to know more about the past of the old man sitting in the window corner. Do you think a single moment is enough to change the way we see a person? Comment 1 if you find this story interesting and want to hear more. That morning, the atmosphere inside the Harbor Lights diner was as familiar as ever. The sound of spoons stirring cups, the hiss of the coffee machine, the mingling sense of pancakes and the sea. Sam sat at his usual spot, leaning slightly back so he could both watch the dock and observe the entire room. The door swung open, letting in the dazzling Coronado morning light and the shadows of 4 young men noisily entering. The smell of beer mixed with cheap cologne filled the air, accompanied by laughter far louder than necessary. They took over a whole row of seats in the center of the diner, shedding their jackets onto the table as if no one else existed in the room. At first, their talk was just loud jokes within the group, but minutes later, the eyes of the man in the red hoodie fixed on the corner where Sam Saturday, his smile stretched, twisted in a way anyone who'd lived a soldier's life would recognize, the smile that comes just before a taunt aimed at a target. His voice boomed across the diner, deliberately louder than needed. "A guy like you, a soldier? Who'd you protect? Or just run away first?" Laughter erupted, mixing with the smell of beer and the sound of boots on the wooden floor. Sam stayed seated, hands resting on his lap, his gaze steady. A close observer would notice the veins on his hand tighten slightly as he picked up a fallen napkin. He folded it twice, then placed it neatly back on the table, slow, precise movements, as if he hadn't even heard the words spoken. But the group didn't stop. A crew-cut guy stood and grabbed a spare crutch, leaning against the wall next to Sam's table. He twirled it like a baseball bat, grinning with satisfaction. Melissa at the counter frowned, but hadn't stepped out yet when things crossed the line. The biggest guy, broad shoulders, thick neck, strode straight to the corner table. Without a word, he bent down and yanked the armrest of Sam's wheelchair hard. The sudden pull twisted the wheel, throwing Sam off balance. The familiar chipped blue ceramic mug left the table, crashing to the floor in 3 shards, coffee splattering over the gleaming shoes of the man who had just pulled him. At the same moment, an old photo slipped from Sam's canvas bag. It landed face down for a few seconds, then the breeze from the partially open diner door flipped it over. Morning light hit the picture squarely, revealing a young man soaked in seawater, wearing a diving mask, standing with his teammates on the bow of a ship. The faded words, "SEAL Team 4, were still visible on the edge of his protective cloak. For several seconds, the diner seemed to lose all sound. The clink of spoons stopped. The coffee machine's hiss became the only noise. The manager, near the counter, looked away, pretending to sort receipts. Other customers bowed their heads to focus on their breakfast, as if this scene had never happened. Melissa was different. She stood still, eyes fixed on the photo on the floor. For the first time, she noticed that the faded trident tattoo on Sam's arm, which she'd thought was just an old tattoo, matched perfectly the insignia on the man's chest in the picture. Her heartbeat quickened, realizing she was witnessing something far beyond ordinary bullying. Sam remained silent. He bent down so no one could see his expression. His strong hand reached out, picked up the photo, gently dusted off the specks clinging to it. He placed it neatly back into his bag, as if returning a precious item to its rightful place. The big guy sneered, unaware or uncaring of what he'd just done. He turned back to his table and dropped into a chair with a smug look, the chair legs screeching on the wooden floor. His friends burst out laughing, hollow laughs echoing through the room. But Melissa knew, and now a few others were starting to notice, that this moment was not just humiliation. It was something that would spread, would come back, and would change this diner forever. Do you believe a single photo dropping to the floor can change the whole atmosphere of a room? Comment 1 if you find this story interesting and want to hear more. At a table near the door, amid the gentle clinking of cutlery on plates, Mark Sullivan quietly set down his coffee. He didn't take his eyes off the group of young men laughing loudly in the middle of the diner. The middle-aged man with graying hair wore a dark navy windbreaker, the shoulders still dusted with salt from offshore training sessions. He didn't need to ask. He already knew he had just witnessed something unacceptable. Next to Mark, his 9-year-old son sat silently, eyes shifting from the laughing youths to the old man in the corner. The familiar chipped blue mug lay shattered on the wooden floor, coffee forming a dark stain. The old photo had just been picked up and tucked away. The boy gently tugged his father's sleeve, speaking in a low voice. as if afraid to break the thick silence. "Dad, is he a soldier like you?" Mark looked at Sam for a long moment. His gaze dropped to the faded tattoo on the aged forearm, then back to the photo he had glimpsed. He nodded slowly, answering almost just for his son, "More than that." For someone who had served, some signs are unmistakable. The silent yet unbowed attitude, the precision in every movement, and eyes used to assessing a situation within seconds. Mark knew Sam wasn't someone to be pushed aside like a broken object. He stood up, movements calm but decisive, and pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. His fingers moved quickly over the screen, dialing a familiar number. When the line was answered, his voice was low and clipped. "Sullivan here. I need a few people at Harbor Lights. We've got a special guest to greet." Ending the call, Mark returned to the table, sat down, and resumed eating his now cooling scrambled eggs. His son looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and excitement, but Mark just shrugged, as if everything was already part of the plan. His calm demeanor even made Melissa, standing behind the counter, feel her heartbeat slow a little. The group of young men kept laughing, unaware that the atmosphere in the diner had subtly shifted. A few older patrons lifted their heads from breakfast, exchanging brief looks. No words were spoken, but in those eyes was the same message: wait and see. Sam remained at the corner table, carefully adjusting the wheels of his wheelchair. He wiped the remaining coffee stains from the rim with a napkin and folded it neatly. Every movement he made, slow and deliberate, felt like preparation for something about to happen. Mark took the last sip of his coffee, glancing toward the door. He knew the people he called would arrive soon. In the military, a call like that was never ignored. And when they showed up, no explanation would be necessary. A light breeze from the bay swept through the door each time a customer came or went, carrying the scent of salt water. Sam lifted his head for a moment, eyes following the door as if measuring the distance. Anyone perceptive enough would see in him a vigilance, unlike fear, more the instinct of someone who had led a team through some of the most dangerous waters. Melissa sensed something different. She didn't quite understand, but her intuition told her this peaceful morning was about to take a turn. She quietly refilled coffee cups for a few customers, eyes discreetly watching Sam, Mark, and the young men's group. Outside the harbor, the steady, deep hum of an approaching vehicle's engine began to blend with the sound of waves. Mark checked his watch. Right on time. He placed his hand on the table, a faint smile touching his lips like someone who already knew exactly how the next part of the story would unfold. Have you ever been in a room where everyone thinks they know what they're doing until the door opens? 30 minutes later, the deep rumble of a diesel engine from the bay filtered through the glass windows of Harbor Lights Diner. Melissa recognized the sound even before the gray military SUV rolled into the parking lot. It wasn't the engine noise of a civilian vehicle, but a deep, steady rhythm, like the measured march of a lifetime-trained unit. The door opened. 4 men entered, dressed in neat combat uniforms, polished boots, every movement purposeful. 3 wore Navy SEAL insignia. The 4th, a rescue worker with a deep red rescue patch on his shoulder. They didn't ask or look around. All 4 moved fluidly straight to the corner table where Sam Harlan Saturday. Leading them was a tall, broad-shouldered chief petty officer with silver hair. His steps were firm and heavy. He stopped before Sam and stood at attention as if on a ship's deck. His arm rose in a perfect salute. "Master Chief Harlan, apologies for being late." Sam froze for a moment, then slowly sat up straight, squared his shoulders, eyes focused. His right hand rose, returning the salute with such precision that time seemed to rewind decades. His eyes lit up a light recognized by anyone who'd worn the uniform, but rarely seen in civilian life. The chief lowered his arm, turned and spoke loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. "No one touches one of us. Ever. The words were calm but struck straight to the spine of everyone present. A brief silence fell. Then in the corner, an elderly man wearing a USS Midway cap stood slowly, his heel tapping lightly on the wooden floor as he stood at attention. Next came a middle-aged man in a dark navy jacket. Then 3 young sailors fresh from North Island Naval Base. All stood silently, solemnly facing the corner table. The diner's atmosphere shifted dramatically. The loud laughter vanished as if it had never existed. The bullies shrank back, eyes downcast on the table, fingers nervously tracing their cold coffee cups. Their false confidence evaporated under the steady gaze of those who had just entered. Melissa stood behind the counter, feeling her hands tremble slightly. Not from fear, but from witnessing the entire room's transformation in just a few breaths. She knew she was seeing a moment no photo could ever fully capture. The chief stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on Sam's shoulder. No words were needed. The exchanged look was enough for Sam to know he was not alone. The 3 others lined up behind him, ready as if guarding a comrade in the middle of a mission. At the table near the door, Mark Sullivan nodded quietly, lips curling into an almost subtle smile. He knew these men hadn't come to show off, but to remind everyone and Sam himself of an unchangeable truth. Once part of the team, always part of the team. The breeze from the door carried the scent of the sea. Sam held his posture, feeling the warmth from the chief's hand on his shoulder. In that moment, he saw himself years ago, not in a small Coronado diner, but on the deck of a ship, amid towering waves, alongside those who would never abandon him. Have you ever witnessed a room change its entire atmosphere just because 4 people walked in? Since that morning, the atmosphere at Harbor Lights Diner had changed. Right by the entrance, a new brass plaque gleamed under the lights. All service members, all generations are welcome here. The once bare wall inside now held a large framed photo, a young Sam Harlan, still dripping from a dive, standing with his team on the bow of SEAL Team 4's ship. Beside it, the chipped blue ceramic mug had been restored by a local pottery artist and displayed in a glass case, an unspoken testament to a day the whole town would long remember. Sam still came to the diner every morning, still chose the table by the window overlooking the dock, but now, he rarely sat alone. Sometimes retired Navy veterans from North Island would stop by. Other times, groups of young sailors newly assigned there sought him out to hear stories they'd never read in training manuals. Melissa changed too. She learned to recognize military insignia from the colors of medal ribbons to patches on sleeves. She no longer asked awkward questions. Now, she'd always pour Sam's coffee before he could signal, sometimes adding a small piece of pie beside it. Extra energy for the mission, she joked. Mark and his son became regular weekend visitors. The boy often brought crayons and drawings, an old man in a wheelchair by the sea, a warship behind him, a few seagulls in the sky. Sam accepted each drawing carefully, folding and tucking them into his jacket pocket as if they were important documents. Once, the boy whispered, "I'll draw another ship, so if one sails away, you'll still have one left here." Sam only smiled, but his eyes grew still for a moment. Not just the diner, the whole community shifted. Veterans from other states, hearing the story, came seeking Sam out when visiting Coronado. The owner began displaying photos and memorabilia of those who had served, turning a corner wall into an honor wall. A small fund was set up to support struggling veterans, starting with donations from customers who had witnessed that morning. The troublemakers from that day, no longer seen in the diner. Some said they were ashamed. Others simply avoided the place where every glance reminded them of a mistake they couldn't forget. Sam never sought attention, but he didn't refuse when someone wanted to hear about his distant voyages, the night sea, and big waves. He kept his stories sparse, letting pauses carry more weight than any detail. When asked why he always came in the morning, he'd just shrug. "A good ship always checks its course before sailing." Younger folks began learning from him that honor wasn't in words told, but in how we treat each other in the smallest moments. And older veterans found in him a reason to pick up the phone and call old comrades they hadn't spoken to in years. News traveled fast in Coronado. Before long, Harbor Lights Diner wasn't just a waterfront eatery, but a gathering place where military personnel, veterans, and civilians shared coffee and true stories. One morning, as sunlight tilted through the windows, Sam noticed the diner was quieter than usual. The door opened, and a young soldier in pristine uniform stepped inside. He hesitated, clutching his cap, eyes searching for a seat. Sam wheeled over and stopped right in front of him. "Sit with me. The coffee's good here, and you'll find better things too." The young soldier looked surprised, then nodded and followed. Melissa smiled from behind the counter, pouring more coffee. In the mirror behind her, images of 3 generations of service members reflected together a gentle reminder that, here, no one gets left behind. On a quiet morning, Sam sat at his usual table, the restored blue ceramic mug neatly placed before him. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the photo of his younger self hanging on the wall. Melissa poured more coffee. Mark and his son walked in, followed by a few young sailors. No one spoke much, but their presence was enough for Sam to know he was never truly alone. The chipped blue mug, once shattered on the wooden floor, now stood strong behind glass. Not perfect, but whole, like a person scarred by loss, yet capable of healing with the help of steady hands. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this story is that honor doesn't fade with time, and respect knows no age or condition. If you have ever witnessed a moment that changed the way you see someone, please share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video because maybe it will reach the heart of someone who needs to be reminded they still belong. All I'm asking for is one more night alive. Those were the quiet, desperate words of Luna Moretti when she was caught in the act of taking a box of protein milk. As the officers reached for the cuffs, her eyes locked on a single object swinging against her chest, a battered, rust-stained military dog tag. Within hours, the nation would learn who she truly was, a former Navy SEAL who had once rescued dozens during classified missions, now left to drift through the streets of Seattle, the result of a broken system and a promise she could never fulfill to the one she loved most. Luna Moretti, 58, is a name few recall, but a face everyone in Capitol Hill recognizes, the neighborhood where she has lived without a home for nearly a decade. Thin, with wind-tangled gray hair and eyes permanently reddened from cold and coughing, she carries an old military rucksack made from faded camouflage canvas. Its straps worn to threads, the same standard issue once given to Navy SEALs. Locals are used to seeing her collect empty cans. She never begs, never causes a scene, only moving in quiet avoidance, as if apologizing for existing. What no one knows is that Luna served 22 years in the U.S. Navy, including 8 special operations deployments to global hotspots: Fallujah, Ramadi, Helmand. In those places, she was more than a soldier. She was the anchor of her team, the steady voice in the fiercest moments. Her comrades called her Anchor because she never faltered. But the one thing she couldn't save was her own husband. In 2011, her husband Marco died from complications of liver cancer, a disease that should have been caught early if not for a missed test result at the VA hospital. For 3 straight weeks, Luna sat by his hospital bed without leaving once. When Marco took his last breath, she didn't cry. She simply stayed there, holding his hand for nearly 2 hours, as though if she never let go, he might not leave. After the funeral, Luna closed her bank account, sold the house, and donated all her money to the charity where Marco had once volunteered. She left her papers neatly on the kitchen table and walked away, no farewell, no forwarding address. To the government, she had exited the system. To society, she became a ghost. To herself, she ceased to exist. Now she lives on the city's margins, sleeping behind bus shelters and under the awnings of shuttered shops. On rainy nights, she spreads an old poncho across the cold concrete and curls into herself as if still lying in a trench under fire. Each morning, she wakes before dawn, packing everything away without leaving a trace. She once said, "The battlefield taught me never to give away my position. The streets are no different." Other homeless people call her Ghost because she appears and vanishes like a breath, never staying in the same spot 2 nights in a row. A few restaurant workers who recognize her quietly leave scraps in a bin out back, but she rarely says more than a sentence to anyone. She doesn't ask for help. She doesn't complain. She just lives, or rather, endures. Once, in a charity kitchen on a cold, rainy afternoon, Luna spoke to a student volunteer just enough for words that would be remembered forever. "I learned how to survive under fire, but no one taught me how to live after he was gone." The words faded into the sound of the rain. No one asked more, and Luna offered no explanation. She rose, pulled her collar up, and slipped away as if she had never been there. But soon no one will be able to walk past her like that again. Have you ever passed by someone never realizing you had just brushed against an entire forgotten epic?
Welcome to Veteran Life Stories, where real sacrifice meets unforgettable storytelling. Subscribe and keep their courage alive.
He stepped into the store before the sun had crested the roof of the second floor. Rain fell, cold and damp, the wind cutting through layers of coats long past their ability to keep warmth in. Cole didn't look around. He knew this shop, knew the camera's location, knew the quiet hours, knew that the owner would step out from behind the counter to help elderly customers pay. This wasn't a plan. It was the survival instinct of a man who had lived by analyzing every nook and cranny in seconds. The protein milk sat on the bottom shelf. A cheap brand, nearly expired, its silver label worn. His hand trembled as he picked it up. Not from fear, but because it was the only thing he'd thought about for 3 days. His stomach was hollow, his throat raw, and his coughs were lasting longer than usual. He shoved the carton inside his coat, zipping it just halfway. Then he turned slowly toward the door. "Stop," a voice rang out from behind the counter. Not loud, but firm. The shopkeeper had installed a new corner mirror. He saw the entire motion. His finger hovered over his phone. "I'm calling the police." Cole froze. He didn't argue, didn't bolt. He turned back, pulled off his hood. Rain dripped from his collar. "I just need enough strength to live one more night," he said, his voice barely audible. The police arrived 6 minutes later. 2 officers. The younger one, Rivera, a Latino man, still awkward as he took notes. The senior officer moved with practiced efficiency, processing the incident quickly. As Rivera bent down to cuff him, he paused. A chain glinted beneath Cole's collar, a military dog tag, so old the letters were faded, but still legible. Name, blood type, unit code. "You used to be a SEAL?" Rivera asked, surprise evident in his tone. Cole said nothing, only nodded. No reason to explain further. Outside, the rain intensified. At the King County precinct, his file was sparse. No address, no next of kin, a handful of prior detentions for food theft. The officers filed their report, sent it on to the prosecutor, just another petty theft case. They knew nothing of night missions in Helmand, nothing of SEAL teams returning under fire to rescue trapped comrades in the desert. A few hours later, the prosecutor's office recommended holding him until trial. The reason was simple. Cole was homeless, had no fixed residence, and a record of minor offenses. His case quickly landed on the summary docket, a name unworthy of notice among hundreds of files. No one knew that the judge assigned to the case was Daniel Whitaker, a former Marine deployed to Fallujah in 2004. It was a SEAL team that saved his unit when they were surrounded. The SEAL commander who barked over the radio, "I'll get them out, no matter what," that was Cole Mercer. But time and war had blurred the details, and Whitaker had no inkling he would encounter that name not in uniform, but on a defendant's roll. When he opened the file that evening and read, Mercer, Cole A., his hand froze. Why would a man like that be arrested for stealing a carton of milk? And why had he been living on the streets for years without anyone recognizing him? Sometimes justice begins with the smallest questions, and sometimes the most significant reunions in life come under the most unexpected circumstances. What do you think happens when the judge realizes the very man who saved his life now stands before the bench? Relax and leave a 1 or comment, "I'm still here," to keep listening. She entered the small grocery just before the sun climbed over the second-floor roofline. Rain came down in icy sheets, the wind cutting through coats that had long since lost their warmth. Luna Moretti didn't glance around. She knew this place where the camera hung when the aisles stayed quiet, and how the owner always stepped away from the counter to help elderly customers count their change. It wasn't some premeditated scheme. It was muscle memory, the instinct of someone who'd spent years reading a room in seconds. The protein milk was on the bottom shelf. A generic brand, nearly expired, its silver label dulled by wear. Her hand shook as she reached for it, not out of fear, but because she'd thought of nothing else for 3 days. Her stomach was a hollow ache, her throat scraped raw, and the coughing fits were lasting longer than before. She slid the carton into her coat, zipping it only halfway, then turned slowly toward the door. "Stop." The word came from behind the counter, firm, steady, not raised. A new corner mirror had given the shopkeeper the full view. His finger hovered above his phone. "I'm calling the police." Luna stopped. She didn't argue, didn't run. Pulling back her hood, she let the rain drip from her hair and collar. "I just need enough strength to make it through one more night," she murmured, barely above a whisper. The officers arrived in 6 minutes, 2 of them. The younger, Rivera, a Latino man still finding his rhythm, scribbled notes. The older one moved with practiced detachment, processing the scene without hesitation. When Rivera bent to cuff her, something caught the light, a tarnished chain beneath her collar, a military dog tag, letters worn but readable name, blood type, unit code. "You were a SEAL?" Rivera asked, startled. Luna only gave a slight nod. There was nothing more to say. Outside, the rain grew heavier. At the King County precinct, her file was thin. No address, no next of kin, a handful of prior detentions for food theft. The report went to the prosecutor, just another petty theft. No one in that room knew about midnight insertions into Helmand, or the SEAL teams who charged back under fire to pull out trapped comrades. Hours later, the prosecutor recommended holding her until trial. The logic was simple: no fixed residence, a record of minor offenses. Her name was dropped onto the summary docket, one case among hundreds. No one realized that the judge assigned to the hearing was Daniel Whitaker, a former Marine who had fought in Fallujah in 2004. Back then, a SEAL team had saved his unit from being overrun. The commander who'd shouted over the radio, "I'll get them out no matter what." That had been Luna Moretti. Time and war had blurred the edges of memory, and Whitaker had no reason to expect he'd see that name again, certainly not in a defendant's file. But when he opened it that evening and read Moretti Luna R., his hand went still. Why would the woman who once saved his life be standing in court for stealing a carton of milk? And how had she been living on the streets for years without anyone noticing? Sometimes justice begins with the smallest of questions. And sometimes the most profound reunions in life arrive in the unlikeliest of courtrooms. What do you think happens when the judge realizes the person before him is the very one who saved him? Type 1 or comment, "I'm still here," to hear the rest. There are people who vanish from public view not because of guilt, but because the world has forgotten how to speak their name. When Judge Daniel Whitaker realized that the name Luna R. Moretti belonged to the woman who had once carried him out of the chaos of Fallujah in 2004, he knew this could not be chance. He had to know the truth. Using the special access granted to him during his time on a military transition oversight board, Whitaker called the Northwest Regional Office of the Department of Veterans Affairs and requested that long-archived records silent for over a decade be brought back to life. 12 hours later, lines of data slowly appeared on his screen like a reluctant confession. Luna Moretti had been among the Navy SEALs' most elite operators during the Middle Eastern campaigns. She had earned the Silver Star for fearless leadership during a hostage rescue in Kunduz, the Bronze Star with valor for leading a night raid in Ramadi under relentless fire, and the Purple Heart for wounds sustained during the Fallujah withdrawal, an injury that permanently damaged her left hip. In one detailed report, she was recorded as carrying a wounded Marine Whitaker himself nearly 2 miles through active gunfire. Yet all those medals couldn't stop her from being erased. In 2009, during the nationwide migration to a new veterans data system, a clerical glitch marked her address as invalid. Mail was returned, no follow-up calls were made, no one checked further. Without warning, the system removed her from the monthly stipend list and canceled her healthcare access. The bitter twist? At that very time, Luna was caring for her husband Marco, whose liver cancer had been misdiagnosed at that same VA hospital. When he died, she fell into a long, unbroken silence. No appeals. No requests for review. She turned away from the system just as the system had turned away from the person she loved most. For the next 14 years, she existed like a shadow in the heart of the city. No home, no health insurance, no access to veteran mental health care, and no one asked why. A woman who had risked her life for others now fought each night just to keep a shred of warmth in her lungs as she slept against cold brick walls. Whitaker held the nearly 80-page file in his hands, heavier than any indictment he had ever read, not because of the number of pages, but because of the moral weight it carried. This was no longer about a stolen carton of milk. It was proof of a system that had abandoned the very people who had defended it. Quietly, he sent the entire record to the public defender's office, urging them to re-examine the case through a veteran's lens. He called 3 of Luna's former teammates, all of whom confirmed the reports and spoke of their deep respect for her. Moretti never left anyone behind, one of them said, even when she had nothing left. A grainy photograph from 2004 now lay before Whitaker Luna lifting a wounded boy toward a medevac helicopter, the air clouded with dust and smoke. It had once appeared on page 3 of a national newspaper before fading into obscurity. Now, it stood as undeniable proof not only of an event, but of a collective forgetting. Staring out the window into the rain, Whitaker wondered, if he had failed to recognize the woman who had once saved his life, how much longer would it take before Luna was seen again, not as a homeless stranger, but as a human being? How many more people like Luna Moretti are disappearing every day, every night, because the system has no memory? My dear audience, the next chapter will move you even deeper. Please like the video, subscribe, and share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing this community connect from every corner of the world. The next morning, Seattle's sky hung heavy in its usual gray, but inside the King County courtroom, the air felt different. Seats that were often empty were now filled to capacity. Fellow veterans in uniform, local reporters, and even residents who had once seen Luna Moretti quietly gathering empty cans outside a cafe, all gathered to witness who she truly was. She was escorted and wearing clothing donated by a veterans support organization, her hair neatly trimmed, her face clean-shaven of its weariness, yet her eyes remained unchanged, silent, steady, without expectation. She sat beside an elderly attorney from the Special Operations Veterans Legal Aid Society, the one who had volunteered to represent her the moment her military record became public. Judge Whitaker entered with a composed expression, the file he had studied all night in his hand, and without the usual preamble, fixed his gaze on Luna. "Miss Moretti," he said, "is there anything you wish to tell the court before we hear testimony?" Luna's voice was low but unshaken as she replied, "I would like to remain silent just as I have for the past 14 years. The room went still. It was not an excuse but a simple truth. A faint rustle moved through the gallery before a tall man in a dress uniform, bearing the insignia of a colonel and the authority of a former SEAL Team 3 commander, took the stand. His voice was measured yet unyielding. "I trusted Luna Moretti with the lives of my team. She did not just save her comrades, she upheld the very system that now sits in judgment of her." He submitted a series of documents into evidence, a confirmation letter from the Pacific Fleet Admiral, after-action reports, award citations, and most damning, a Department of Veterans Affairs error report. The attorney laid out the administrative breakdown that had stripped her of benefits, and no one in the room moved to object. An inspector general's finding confirmed that over 14 years, she had been denied $1,574 per month in benefits, along with medical and psychological support amounting to nearly $268, 0-inch unpaid aid. When the verdict was delivered, Luna did not celebrate. She did not smile. She only gave a small, quiet nod, and her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement that she was finally seen. Immediately, an emergency relief fund was approved, granting her not only the back pay, but also new housing, full medical rehabilitation, and ongoing mental health care. Her temporary apartment was in a quiet veterans housing complex, its windows opening onto a park. News outlets picked up the story, and it spread like fire across dry grass. The faded 2004 photograph of Luna carrying a wounded boy to a medevac helicopter resurfaced, now set beside the image of her at the defendant's table, a single frame holding both the hero and the forgotten. Somewhere in the system, a review began of veterans who had vanished from official records. But in that Seattle courtroom, what lingered was the stillness of something restored after years of silence. The question now was no longer whether justice would arrive in time. It was whether we still had the courage to ask how many other Lunas waited to hear their names spoken once again. In the weeks following the trial, images of Luna Moretti began flooding newspapers and social media. The most shared photograph did not show her in uniform or with medals, but as a thin, weary woman stooping to retrieve a dropped carton of protein milk at the curb, a faded U.S. Navy recruitment poster towering in the background. The contrast struck like a lightning bolt. A woman who had once risked everything for her country, now struggling simply to secure her next meal. The hashtag number Justice for Luna quickly trended nationwide. Veteran organizations, families of service members, and countless civilians who had never worn a uniform added their voices. Within months, the newly formed Moretti Foundation, dedicated to supporting veterans forgotten by the VA system, had raised over $4 million. In response to the outcry, Congress held a special hearing on lost records and the bureaucratic failures that caused veterans to disappear from the system. A sweeping review by the Department of Veterans Affairs uncovered nearly 11,000 similar cases, men and women living in the shadows, unasked after and unremembered. Luna never sought to be a symbol. She turned down most interview requests, refusing to be the object of pity. Instead, she visited rehabilitation centers, schools for at-risk youth, and juvenile detention facilities, speaking not about war or her medals, but about the fragile currency of faith and what happens when it is left to wither. Honor, she told a room of young inmates, isn't the ribbon on your chest, it's keeping your promise even when no one else remembers you made it. Her voice, quiet but unwavering, silenced the room. Later, at a Seattle event hosted by the Moretti Foundation, a bronze statue was unveiled, depicting the moment she carried a wounded Marine from Fallujah, crafted from the once classified photograph. The plinth bore the inscription, "Strength lies not in weapons, but in loyalty that never fades." The statue now stands in the city's Central Park, the same park where Luna had once slept behind a dumpster. It was a circle closed, an unspoken apology from a city that had once turned away. On Veterans Day, she wore her SEAL uniform for the first time in years, its fabric pressed, its epaulets heavy with hard-earned medals. As she stepped to the podium at the memorial, the entire crowd rose not in a choreographed tribute, but in a spontaneous wave of respect, from fresh recruits to retired generals. Luna said little. She simply scanned the crowd, her eyes no longer dulled by grief, and into the microphone spoke. Some things, if you wait long enough, justice will come back to find you. The applause was not explosive. It was deep and steady, the kind of sound given to someone who has traveled a road no one else dared walk. That afternoon, she sat beneath her statue, gazing up at the bronze face of the woman she once was, and nodded not to the past, but to the present that had finally restored her place. What would it mean if someone once forgotten by all became a living symbol to ensure no one else would ever be erased? Luna Moretti's journey was not only about reclaiming justice, it was a mirror reflecting that some wounds bleed without spilling blood, and some heroes do not need to be called by name to be known. In the noise of the modern world, sometimes the most powerful gift is a steady gaze that meets yours, a hand that reaches out, a reminder. I see you, you are still here. And if you have ever felt invisible, if you are still searching for your worth, remember justice may be late, but kindness is never out of time. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If Luna's journey has touched you, please leave a heart, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass this story on so her light can reach even farther. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can continue uncovering the stories that must never be forgotten.